Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings. How's everybody doing? I know that the announcement for the show got out a little late, but I'm sure people had picked it up. I want to again encourage people who are viewing the show. If you like the show, hit the like button and hit the subscriber button. For people that don't know, that's the red button. Just hit it and you subscribe. And don't think I'll do this at the end of the show, because if you're like me and a lot of other people, you might forget to do it. You know what I mean? So do that. This show is the 150th of these shows, the Dr. Oba Tashaka Show, and they've involved a lot of work. Each show is a chapter in a book, and a number of the shows are series. And so if you go and check them out, you'll see that, you know, we have a number of shows where there are 2, 3, sometimes 4 parts. The shows on the Twa are an example, one of the best of our series, which is new history, because we're going into what is generally not included in history, called prehistory, which is the Twa, which set the stage for world history. It is formative history. It's the beginning of human history, and created the longest lasting civilization and the highest state of civilization humanity has ever gone through. And then we've had a series on the Anu, the founders of Kemet. Most scholars start with dynastic Kemet. We're actually going before that. And Dr. Finch has a book out now on Egypt 10,000 BC, where he's going back to that period. I want to get that book and check it out. He's a great scholar. You should check his work out. And then we've had a series on Free the Mind, a series on Black liberation movements. In fact, we started the show off with the San Francisco Freedom Movement, the one that I was privileged to lead between 63 and 66, the only successful Black freedom, Black power movement in the North in the 60s since 63 to now. And we had across the board victories empowering our people, across the board. And this was an economic movement that no other movement accomplished on that level. And that is what really shaped me. My best organizing comes out of the San Francisco freedom movement. So we've had a series on the power of the mind, a number of series on spirituality, the African spirit systems, and how they're important in terms of empowering us as a people and humanity at large. And, you've seen some of the series that we did on the Yoruba, Asante, and we touched on the Dogon, and with the heavy focus on Kemet. So, we've covered a broad range of things, and then we've dealt with issues in this country, the second post-Reconstruction, when Trump was running for office. So this is a show that covers a lot, and we've had on some good people. Menu Ampin on King, the revolutionary. He's the best authority on the Reverend Martin Luther King in the world, and his master's thesis on that subject, I expect to be seen turned into a book. And we had the great author on the assassination of Malcolm X, Babazak Kondo. We had an in-depth discussion. He's the foremost authority on Malcolm's assassination, over 3 hours. And when I bring people on, they're good at what they do. And we had an in-depth conversation between Dr. Theophil Abenga and myself. He's the best scholar in the world on dynastic Kemet and a multidimensional scholar, and we'll be having him on again. I hired him at San Francisco State in 1998, and he stayed at my house for about 3 months. He's my buddy. And when you see that show, if you haven't seen it, you go back, you'll note that it opens with a university that he persuaded the president of the Congo Brazzaville, to set up. And it has now a place for 10,000 students. So check those out. So this show covers a lot of different topics. It's like chapters in a book, because I'm like Louis Armstrong. We're born on the same birthday, August the 4th, and he viewed his jazz, and he was one of the great innovators of jazz. If there was a single one, it would be him. There wasn't, but he would be close to be one of the singular ones. He regarded his music as chapters in a book. We're both born August the 4th, and I won't go into why that's the case, but that's how I view presentations. If I'm giving a speech, in this case, a presentation, chapters in a book. So a lot of these shows are going to be put into book format, to let you know. So this has been work. My good friend John Handy, who was on one of our shows, a jazz musician, and was a leader in the San Francisco chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, San Francisco Freedom Movement. He had a million-selling jazz record called Hard Work. He's now 90 years old. And so this has been hard work, but I've enjoyed it. But I really enjoy the love that you have expressed towards me and to the people who put this show together. So as you know, the central, I have only one motive. I want to empower people with a sense of their own inner power, so that on the spiritual, political, social, economic level, and every other level, whatever their level is, if they're an artist, whatever, scientist, whatever, they fly, And so what this show is about, and I put in quite a bit of money into this, because I'm not going to go for corporate sponsorship. So I can't have too many other motives. And I want to note that in the Black freedom movement, Black power movement, Pan-Africanist and Afrocentric movements, I haven't accepted a dime. It was 1 year where we got Black businesses to finance what became the Pan African Peoples Organization that followed the San Francisco Freedom Movement. And that group, you saw some of the teachers discuss their teaching in an African-centered school that we've had in operation since 1972. And so for 1 year, Black businesses financed the organization and paid me a salary and a secretary. But other than that, I've accepted no dimes, nickels, quarters, dollars, dead presidents for anything I've done for my people. I'm unbought and unowned. I follow the truth, and I'm following that same principle with this show. So I fought corporations all my life. So why am I going to become an ad man to make a little chump change on the internet? And by the way, I'm an economic developer. I'm pretty good at it. And so, I mean, if I want to make money, I know how. But money ain't my first passion. People, but most important, the love of the truth. The truth is, to me, the most important thing, and God is the ultimate source of that, as I've come to experience. So I hope you get something out of this. This is for your benefit. And we welcome questions. And the more thought you put into these questions, the better they are. Loud to Zoo is often laying out some good questions. And if you got some questions, put them out there. And if you got comments, put them out there. One of the things that's been difficult with this show is because when I started it, I knew if I started it around something like the Dr. Obertashaka show, it was going to be harder to move it because only so many people know who I am. So it'd been easier to just go on the normal format where you just bring in people and interview them regularly. But I would have no reason to do the show if I did that, because I have a lot of other things I'm doing: organizing, training, writing books, speaking, doing different things. And I have a lovely sister in my life. And so, there are other things that I do. So the only reason I would have is to try and do intergenerational sharing of knowledge. And we've had some younger people on this show, and one of whom is helping me right now in terms of organizing. And there are others that we'll be picking up. And Brother Ugawa is one. He started out at 38 years of age, and he has been helping build this show. He's a major reason that it's taking off. So it was interesting to find that up to 4 weeks ago, we started getting 1,000 viewers a month, which for most shows is nothing. But for my show, it's something. And the viewers that come on this show tend to stick. There's a consciousness they have and stuff like that. And so then last week, it was interesting because the show went from 1,000 in a week to 1,000 in a day. And Ogawa he calls me twice a week, and we have these conversations. So we were wondering, where is this going? The last time I looked, from last week to today, we had 5,200 viewers. 5,200. Now, for this show, that is a takeoff. And over 100 subscribers. So, and usually what happens with this show is by Wednesday, the viewers, the new viewers taper off. So it keeps coming in. So that's the first thing that was interesting. So then when I went to the demographics, and I know these demographics are not completely accurate because I know that there are other people watching the show that are not included here. But what we found is with this last week's show, the viewers came from the United States, the United Kingdom, South Africa, Canada, Jamaica, Germany, Netherlands, Kenya, and Trinidad and Tobago. And they were viewing for consistently good periods of time, So that's the first thing. But we know that we have viewers coming from Kenya. We know that we have them regularly from Ghana, from Nigeria. There are other places. The analytics that they provide you with from YouTube are just partially accurate, but they give you at least a picture. And then when we looked at this, we could see that viewers in terms of cities, we're coming from New York, London, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Chicago, Toronto, California, Nairobi, Kenya, Detroit, Pretoria, South Africa, Charlotte, North Carolina, Baltimore, Maryland, Dallas, Texas, Jacksonville, Florida, Washington, D.C., Boston, Johannesburg, South Africa. And I really want to say that Brother Mkulu, that was on the show about a month ago, who's from Johannesburg, South Africa, and leads the African-centered movement in South Africa, we've generated 1,600 views from that interview and 800 new subscribers. And I want to say this also, the South African listeners are among the longest listeners, meaning they listen the longest, sometimes longer than the African American. And the African American is, of course, making up the largest listening audience. So this is good to see this happening because they put us on slow algorithms. And it means that a show that could have gone off a lot quicker, it's taken longer. But, we've hung in there. And with the help of Brother Ugawa, Brother Senevar, who has done some hard work for me and others, many of you who spread the word, it's taken off. The other thing that was very good to see, because I've talked to my wife about this, this is not a talk to the choir show. Meaning, if I'm talking to people in my age group alone, I'm stopping the show. I've never liked that. A lot of us, we just like to stay in this narrow circle. And I like what the youth are doing. I like Black Lives Matter. I know some of you got issues, but I like it because I see the results that they're getting. And they've learned from us, but they've taken it to another level. So what was really encouraging, and we've seen this before, is that while the youngest age group we're picking up is 25 to 34-year-olds, the 35 to 44-year-olds, 18.4% of the viewers come from the 35 to 44 years old. 23.9% of the viewers come from the 45 to 54-year-olds. 30.1% from the 55 to 60-year-olds, and 26% from the 65-year-olds. Well, what's interesting is that the younger viewers are making up the larger segment of that, and it's not just talking to my age group, which is good. And there's nothing wrong with talking to my age group. We've got a lot of heavy people out there, and I'm not dismissing anybody. And then I want to also say I'm a revolutionary. So this show is open to everybody. See, because I'm out to produce, to at least contribute to change throughout the world. And societal change that affects large numbers of folks. As I used to say in the show, when I first started teaching at San Francisco State Black Studies, I just want to teach Black students. I was into that Black thing. I still am, but I was hard-nosed. But then I reached a point as I began to become deeper in my consciousness and more radical in my thoughts, where I saw the value of impacting change among all groups. So I wanted to have students from other ethnicities as well, though this is primarily for Black students. And as long as I had that vibe out there just for Blacks, only Blacks came. But when I put that vibe out there that I'm open to others, others came. As you think, so you are, which is going to be tied into the topic of this show. So I want to thank people for helping expand the show and keep it going, because the whole point is to get the message out to the largest group of people possible. Now, last week's topic was a topic that discussed the relationships or the differences between Kemetic and African philosophy and Aryan and Greek philosophy. And it focused on the central theme of what in Kemet is called septepi, or the first time or first occasion, when things first happen in the cosmos. And then it also focused on the Greek conception of origin and showed why they focused on evolution. And we focused on Septepi. And the main point that was being made there was to show that the African conception of first time is heavily rooted in the spirit, but not separate from matter, but guided by spirit. Whereas the Aryan or Greek or European conception heavily rooted in material things. And with the Greeks moving away from spirit, and then later Western thinkers going all out in a material orientation. And we can see that is basically the thrust of the world today. Where under capitalism, the materialism is the main orientation, and everything is measured by dollars, francs, pounds, Chinese currency, or Japanese currency, you know? And so you find the average person on the planet living in misery, while a handful has scooped up everything. And so this inequality is something that this show is dedicated to eradicating. I know I can't do it on my own, but the paradigms that I'm putting forward are about just societies to correct that. And this show is a part of that discussion. And I'm not saying that therefore it's a good thing for revolutionaries to be broke. I'm not saying that if you are able to at least put a roof over your head, food on your table, and enjoy life somewhat, there's nothing wrong with that. That's what everybody should have. And this society is designed to prevent. So part of the meaning underneath this show and all shows is about transforming societies from crooked to straight, and where there's an inequality of wealth and power to one where it's evenly distributed. So today, I'm going to examine the Kemetic and African philosophical understanding of the cosmos, showing how it rests on two legs, spirit and matter. Spirit and matter. While Aryan and Greek philosophy, and I'm putting the Greek out there because they're put up as the paradigm for the West, they've kind of exaggerated their significance and importance. And so they claim that they're centering their civilization on the Greek model. And I went through some of the distortions of that last week. But so today we're going to examine the Kemetic and African philosophical understanding of the cosmos that rest on spirit and matter, with spirit having the leading role, and contrasting it with the Aryan, Greek, and other European philosophical systems that are heavily weighted in the direction of materialization, meaning material things. So in the case of the Greeks, there is a progressive separation of spirit from matter. They're still in the spirit world, in part because they're heavily influenced by Kemetic civilization and others that precede theirs. So it's not a clear case of just a material civilization there, but they laid the model for the material civilization, the Greeks did. But it is consistent with the Aryan worldview. So today I'm going to examine the Kemetic and African philosophical understanding of this spirit matter topic. So the topic for today is the Kemetic and African philosophy of the unity of spirit and matter that will save the planet. I'm not suggesting that just by recognizing this, the planet will be saved, but the topic is suggesting that this is the philosophical path for the various measures that need to be taken to save a planet that's on the verge of extinction for life forms, particularly animate life forms through global warming. But this is also the paradigm, the unity of spirit and matter. It is the paradigm for freeing people on this planet. And so today I'll hit parts of these themes. In previous shows, I've been discussing how, as human beings, we are lights. Within us, we all possess a light. All spirit people who have the gift to see this see it when they see a person. They see the radiation coming from a person. And there are different ways in which that radiation occurs. For example, there's a thing called Kirlian photography. Lao Tzu asked, how do you know, or how can you prove that there's a spirit? They have a thing called Kirlian photography where they actually photograph your aura. That is the particular light field that you emit around you. And everybody's aura is of a particular color. And so I went and had mine photographed, and my mother's. My mother's aura is purple. In my master bathroom, I have her purple chair, regal. Those were her colors. That was her favorite color too. Usually your favorite color tells you what your aura is, you know. Mine's gold. I don't know if it's changed, but mine is gold. That's so for her, that meant regality, and they called her queen. She looked like one of our great movie actresses, Alina Horn. My wife said she's prettier. So they both looked alike. They had Louisiana roots. And she had no arrogance about it, but she carried herself like a queen, and her friends called her queen. And her primping time indicated that she was a queen. She took her time. And my father just had to wait, you know what I mean? And she carried regality with her, you know what I mean? That was her. But the point is, her color was purple, and she had that royalty about her. Mine is gold. That indicates intellectual stuff, spiritual stuff. That's me. That's one of my favorite colors, gold. So we are all lights, but we have many lights within us, meaning spirits within the body. And so the central theme of African philosophy began to raise its heads up among African people in the United States and some in Africa and the Caribbean and in Europe, but in the United States especially. Central themes of African philosophy began to raise their spirit up again in the 1960s because Black people in this country, in the South, they were challenging Southern style apartheid and winning battles, defeating it on the level of Southern style segregation that had been intact for almost 100 years, and restoring the right to vote, which they're now chipping away at and trying to take away, because this is the second post-Reconstruction. And so what you saw with the Black freedom and then what would become Black power and then Pan-Africanist and Afrocentric movements to come, but particularly the Black freedom movement, many of us began the process of returning to our African roots. Brother Malcolm X was a mirror of this in prison. He said first his philosophy changed, then his attitude pattern changed, then his thought pattern changed. Then his communication pattern changed, and then his behavior pattern changed from European to African. And he was pushing Africanism up in the Nation of Islam. And when he got out, when he was forced out, that was the major thrust that he was taking then. And so for people like myself, who were in the trenches and leading the only successful Black freedom, Black power movement in the 60s in the North, 10,000 people in the streets, kicking the behinds of corporations and building block by block organizational power, 45,000 Black people organized, building a successful Black United Front, the United Freedom Movement that took our movement from a couple of hundred to 10,000. And then hitting the books, because when I came into the movement, I had been one of those who had been brainwashed. You know, I've said this. I was in the assimilation stage of consciousness. I had been taught all the big words. You know, when I became chair of CORE, my vice chair was 10 years older than me. His name was Kermit Scott. And Kermit, he was a social worker and a very good political campaign organizer. And he said to me, Bill, that was my slave name then. He said, need to break it down, man. You're using too many big words. You know what I mean? I was also coming into the movement with a hard line. I mean, as I got into the movement, I became a hardliner, you know. But my hard line thinking was often frozen in a Eurocentric mindset, even though I came from a Black family. I'd been miseducated, had nothing but white teachers through college, through law school. So I had to undergo a lot of work. And this was a part of what a lot of serious activists in the movement were doing as well. Some didn't, but those that did, they were able to go further. The deeper you went into your past, then the further you could go ahead in producing transformation in the future. So this was a real issue, a set of issues that people like me and others had to address. And so joining the movement, I underwent an awakening. I've talked about this before. It caused me to hit the books on African history. And in the transformation that began to occur in African history, it led me to African philosophy. And I'm a philosopher, historian, and revolutionary political activist and thinker. And there's a lot to that. I won't go into it. But philosophy has really drove my development and growth. And so it was a return to African philosophy for our people. It was new for me. And it was an immersion in African American philosophy and deep thought that I'll go through in a minute. And when we start doing the sixfold stages to mental freedom, you'll see that the development of African identity is twofold. It's both the development of an internalization of African values coming from the best parts of your African past, but it is also a drawing from the deepest parts of new African or African American values, which is true if you come from the Caribbean or if you're coming from some other place. It's going into the depths of your people's culture. And that's the only way you internalize African consciousness, because you've got to practice it in your reality. So to know something, you've got to be that. And that's a process of transformation. So we were addressing then issues that had to do with identity. And then, while then we weren't dealing with a climate crisis, those of us who particularly coming out of San Francisco freedom movement and others in the North, and King and others coming out of the South, moving to the North, we had to begin to look at the economy and the system that runs this country and begin to question it. So the discussion today is going to address this issue of the unity of spirit and matter and the way in which the West has moved to separate spirit from matter theoretically. You can't really separate it in the real world because it's a unity of both. And we're going to use it to address both the environmental crisis that endangers the planet, which by the end of this century, if there are not shifts in this global warming, this planet will become uninhabitable. And it's to address also the inequalities of wealth and power that exist between blacks and whites, the poor and the rich, and that plagues the planet. And so we'll be addressing these at the same time. So the crisis of global warming with rising sea levels, the melting of ice caps, the raging fires, all come from the burning of fossil fuels that are hydrocarbons that contain materials such as coal, oil, and natural gas. This is basically what came from the Industrial Revolution. And it is now putting the Earth on the endangered species list. And the rich want to do absolutely nothing about it. And Black, brown, and red communities in the United States are the ones most affected by this, because these are the places where they locate all of these chemical burning processes, leading to lower life expectancies among our people. So in fact, it was Blacks that coined the term environmental racism. So do not think that this topic is just a general topic. It doesn't affect us. It affects us more than most. So the Black Power and Black freedom movements of the 60s and 70s and the African independence movements, and these movements inspired each other. The African independence movements inspired our movements, both in the South and in the North. And the Black freedom, Black power, Pan-Africanist and Afrocentric movements have inspired African movements on the continent. And there's a reason. The movements generated by Africans in America and the movements generated by Africans on the continent, they have a singular power. And that power, either one of them, produces chain reactions throughout the world. When the African in America moves, then what you find is people around the world move, because New African or African American culture is the culture of popular choice. It is a culture that is very appealing because it is grounded in freedom, but it is also a beautiful culture that has a spirit core or a spiritual core to it, whether it's politics, whether it's music, whether it's athletics. I don't care what form the culture is taking. It picks people up and inspires them. And so it has this ability to create chain reactions, meaning we start something here, it encourages Blacks, whites, brown, red, and yellow people around the world to do something. And so the movements of the 60s did that. We've seen that with Black Lives Matter when the movement was going against Trump in 2020. George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. You saw these movements spread to 50 countries around the world, you know? And it erupted in such a powerful fashion, it threw the emerging fascists out of the White House. Got them prepared for the jailhouse, but we'll see if they lock them up. We get locked up even when we're innocent. Take a loaf of bread, we could serve 20 years on it. This guy's committed every kind of crime. And yet he's getting charged, but he ain't getting charged with the real crime. So the point is, these movements created chain reactions. So the African independence movement impacted us. We could see Africa rising up. And Black students were sitting in the South talking about, we can't even get a hot dog and people are going for independence. So those movements inspired us. It was a two-way thing, but it's the power you have, but you don't think you have any. So you don't appreciate it when you're exercising power in the world. And so when the Panthers come up, the Black Panther Party, you have a Dalit Panther Party in India, a Black Panther Party in all places, Israel. You got the Black Panthers being organized in Britain, all over the world. And then a chain reaction, not just globally, but inside the country. And so when I had the Minister of Culture, Emory Douglas of the Black Panther Party, he informed me, it's the first time I knew this, I've said this on some shows, some of you are new and haven't heard it, others have, that it was the Black Panther Party that inspired the American Indian movement to stand up. Now, the Native Americans have been fighting before we came here, and then when we came here, you understand? But that a band of what was 6,000 Black men and women picking up their guns and standing up to the police could inspire red people on reservations who are catching more hell than you've ever imagined, worse than the hell we catch. And it's bad here. You living on reservations, no running water, no toilets, blah, blah. So this chain reaction wasn't just global, it was internal. And so as we moved, other forces moved. And then as I pointed out, in the San Francisco freedom movement, the San Francisco freedom movement moved whites, young whites at UC Berkeley, which is the premier university of the United States in the world, producing more Nobel laureates than all the Ivies put together. And so the chain reaction began to radicalize them. And what was again radicalizing them? The sense of freedom that they got from this Black freedom movement. They participated and they were shock troops that we used that went to jail, you know, at the last 3 big job campaigns in the San Francisco freedom movement. The Sheraton Palace Hotel that took on over 30 hotels and restaurants in San Francisco, Auto Row, and the Bank of America. And 2 of those 3, they went to jail. Now, any campaign I led, nobody went to jail. I could kick your butt without losing a single person in jail. But these movements here, people went to jail. But they got radicalized and went back to UC Berkeley and started a free speech movement that spread across the country. What radicalized them? The democratic spirit of African American culture, where in the case of the San Francisco freedom movement, we operated on consensus. San Francisco Core did, and the United Freedom Movement did. And they got that sense. And when they went back to UC Berkeley, they weren't using the left model, which under the Marxists is called democratic centralism, where people on the top dictate what happens on the bottom. No, everybody had a say so. That's because our culture infected them, influenced them, and put them out of control. And then they were infected by the spirit of the movement, a spiritual movement. And they got that in the songs. They got that in the spirit of resistance. They got that in the beauty that they saw from Black people standing up. And it instilled that in them. And so it led some of them to embrace what they called their manhood. Mario Savio, the leader of the free speech movement, said he was initiated into manhood by being arrested at the Sheraton Palace Hotel, and then went to Mississippi and was further initiated by Bob Moses, the best organizer that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee produced, and came back talking about what? Fighting against the machine. Because he came back realizing that places like UC, Harvard, Yale, and all of these places were preparing you, as he said, to be cogs in the machine. And so our movement created this chain reaction, transforming their consciousness while we were going into deeper levels of transformation and change. So they were breaking free of this Aryan Greek model. Some of them were. And if you don't think so, who freed Assata Shakur? Black Liberation Army, an arm of the Black Panther Party, and the Weather Underground, the armed resistance movement of what had been SDF, Students for Democratic Society. That was a radicalization they were going through our movement. So this is part of what this transformation was all about. It was putting people in motion where they were beginning to come in conflict with this materialist worldview and models. And it was producing awakening and transformation across the board. Now, of all the awakenings that was occurring in the 60s, the most important awakening was the spirit-based or spiritual awakening. That for African Americans was caused by a return to the depths of African culture, especially African philosophy, and the deepest foundations of African American deep thought or philosophy. And it was through returning to these two that transformation was really being produced. So for someone like me, my first experience with African philosophy was not Kemetic, it was Dogon. And the reason is it was one of the living African systems still intact, not transformed by Christianity or Islam. And so that was my first transformational experience, was through Dogon thought. And then I got exposed to Yoruba consciousness, and I've been in that for 45, 50 years, as I've discussed on that show, and then Kemet. And so then I walked to Kemet, though, through a foundation coming from other African cultures, and then later the Twa. But the key was that in 1963, Lerone Bennett came out with a book called Negro Mood. I've discussed this in some of my earlier shows. And it's only about 120 pages. Lerone Bennett was a master African-American historian. He didn't really focus on Africa. But this book was a deep plunge into African-American deep thought and into what's called the Black establishment, the group of Blacks that have been used to control Black people, the Black establishment. And a lot of people who have been dealing with things like the Boule and stuff, that's surface stuff. If you haven't read Lerone Bennett's The Black Establishment, you don't know how certain groups are used to try and manipulate your butt. And these are Black groups. You understand? And so these two chapters made his book a classic. Now, I usually read people's stuff like Zora Neale Hurston. I read almost all her books. So I said, Mules and Men is her best book. But you're not the authority on someone else's best work. They are. Zora Neale Hurston said Mules and Men was her best book. My best friend, Candy Solowazi, and I, we've talked about Lerone Bennett. He's read most of his books. I got most of them. They're great books. And he didn't just write great books. He had a great artist who illustrated his books. By the way, I do that with my works. Good artists illustrating them. And so I had a brother named White, who was a great artist who illustrated a lot of his books. And so Bennett would come to core conventions, Congress of Racial Equality, national conventions. And then I was at the Selma to Montgomery March where I was arrested. I was a March Marshal. He was there, and at the Million Man March. I said this before, but for people that haven't heard it, I repeat it. Each time I go up to him and I say, hey, Lerone, the first time in Selma, getting ready for the march, I went up to him and said, hey, Lerone, I already knew what his answer would be. What's the best book you've written? I knew what he would say. Negro Mood. And then at the Million Man March, before I'm getting ready to speak, he's on the stage. And I said, every book I've written, I draw from that. And it's affected my thinking. Why haven't you republished it? He said, oh, I will. I know why. Johnson didn't want it republished because of the chapter. The owner of Ebony Magazine because of the chapter on the Black establishment. It realized the role that Ebony Magazine and Johnson Publication played in the Black establishment. So what is it that Bennett revealed? He revealed that the foundational basis of African American culture is rooted in what I call the spiritual blues. And I've done a show on that. I think it's one of the best shows that we've done on this channel. And in it, he makes the comment that historians, and he said Black mythologists, because anytime you're going into the depths of a culture, you go into mythology. And the mythology for African people generally hides basic truths of the cosmos. And the mythology for African American culture does that as well. It hides the fundamental truths of how the universe operates. And so Lerone Bennett and his great work, Negro Mood, and by the way, I encourage Jacob Carruthers, who was my master, Asa Hilliard, who was a good friend, all of the major scholars I have encouraged to get that book. None of them have, except for Raymond Winbush, who's a Black psychologist and is into reparations, has written a book on reparations. The rest have not read it. And I think one reason why we don't is we tend to discount the strength of our own stuff. Well, sorry for you. And so what does Bennett say in this book? The most important, profound statement was this. He said, people who are into the mythology of the blues, both Black and white, usually make the same mistake. They separate the blues from the spirituals. And he went on a riff. And I know this book was written in very short order, because you can see it was inspired. He could write the Black establishment because he was in the center of it. He saw how it was working. And he could write on this blues thing that I'm going to get into in a minute because he was identifying with the high point of the Black freedom movement, which was Birmingham, Operation Confrontation, King's Campaign. And so what did he say? Because it was blues people making up this campaign, grassroots Black folks from Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, the best Black folks who come from the South. And what did he say? He said those both Black and white who deal with Black mythology often make the mistake of separating the blues from the spirituals. But he said right. He said read right. And this came from his soul. He said, the blues are the spirituals, good is bad, God is the devil, and every day is Saturday. Now, what was he saying? He was saying, at the core of New African or African American culture, sacred and secular, spirit and matter are one. The blues are the spirituals. The blues is often described as or thought of as that which is not spiritual, which it is, but it's often thought that way. And the spirituals are thought of that which is spirit-based. The truth is the spirituals are a music that speaks about everyday life. Its core emphasis is on freedom. You can't get any more political than that. But you see, the African never separated things into sacred and secular categories. They were all one. Spirit and matter is all one. And he didn't know it, that he was defining the core principles of African philosophy. Because you could say the same thing in Kemet, except it wouldn't be the blues. It would be spirit and matter. And he said, just as good isn't separated from bad, God isn't separated from the devil. Now, in African thought, there's no devil. So this is an intrusion of foreign thinking. But I get his point, particularly if you're looking at Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, God has both positive and negative qualities. African thought, that's not the case because God is in spirit form. pure, superlative in character, beyond blemish. So that grounding was for me. And by the way, Malcolm read Negro Mood. See, Malcolm was on the cutting edge of stuff. And it didn't have its time to work on him because he was assassinated not long after that. It was a picture of him getting ready to speak at the Socialist Workers' Party. And I looked at what he had in his hand. It was Negro Mood. And don't forget, Malcolm's my second master. I wrote a book on Malcolm, The Political Legacy of Malcolm X. I wear a goatee because Malcolm did. You understand? Malcolm, big influence on a whole lot of us. You hear me? So the point is, when we're talking about the Kemetic African philosophy of the unity of spirit and matter that will save the planet, that is, the approach to saving the planet is going to have an approach that embodies both spirit and matter with spirit guiding it. That's at the core of your own culture. And that's because it grows out of African culture and civilizations, Kemetic, Yoruba, Dogon, Asante, Twa-based, where spirit and matter are one. So on another level, global warming is itself an expression of the materialization of the universe. That is the attempt to take spirit and separate spirit from matter, not in fact, but in theory, and to treat spirit like it's a superstition. So as we had this global awakening, one of the things that was happening to some of our scientists, some of whom were into quantum physics, some of them were impelled by the Black freedom, Black power movements, and by other things going on in the world, in Asia and in other places, to begin to question the philosophical underpinnings of the science that they were practicing. And so they were beginning to question the philosophical rationale for invisible energy fields, such as waves and particles, and the string theory that represent the idea of what energy is in quantum physics. But they could find none within the Western worldview. And what they found in the beginning was a mechanistic idea of science, and that treated invisible energy fields, such as waves and particles, like they were machines. And as one of the leading thinkers in this field, Rene Descartes, that I'll come back to in a minute, said they didn't care about what was the essence of the energy that quantum physics was using. They cared about how to harness it and use it for power and control. And he slipped in one time and said, power and control over the lower regions of the world. This is the same Descartes who said that all people were equal in their thinking. Well, he didn't really believe that, you know? And so what we have is, in the later development coming after the Greeks, we have this mechanistic view of science that Rene Descartes, Galileo, and others developed, where they see the universe as a machine. Now, we know the universe isn't a machine, you know? And so they approach quantum physics, which is basically dealing with invisible energy, which is showing you that all life is basically maintained by spirit, which they call energy. And they're treating it like everything is matter, when what is sustaining matter is what cannot be seen. The no thing, which is the energy that is in everything. And so then, using a mechanistic model in science, then they break the universe up into parts and then create an attack or an opposition between spirit and matter, emphasizing matter and putting spirit to the side. A lot of this orientation has its roots and foundation in the Lord and Master philosophy that comes out of the Aryans starting 3 to 4,000 BC, coming out of the Caucasus Mountains, Ukraine, and Russia, where nomadism becomes a way of life that sweeps the world, and where power becomes the central drive, and where women are put to the side, because one of the key things with the nomadic way of life is it's patriarchal, and women are treated as objects to be used in the service of men. And that very system continues on after them. And so this is also when we're talking about the separation of spirit from matter. Spirit, in many cases, while it can manifest in both masculine and feminine forms, has a strong feminine quality. And in trying to push spirit to the side, it is also part of the project of putting the feminine and females to the side, and inside of every male, pushing the masculine above and the feminine below. And those are issues that I've had to deal with. And if you haven't, then either you came out of a very good family, your orientation is very solid, or it's something you still have to deal with. Because real freedom comes when we have a synthesis of masculine and feminine. My book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, rests on this. So what we see is that this nomadic emphasis on power is carried on into other phases of Aryan culture, including capitalism, where again, it's a drive for power, and in this case, profit. And people are subordinated to that, put in the position of misery. And as I pointed out before, since these Aryans are teleological, that is utility oriented, or they're interested in how something can be used for the purpose of power, then morals are out of the equation. So what we see is that as we underwent a global awakening, some scientists were beginning to question the paradigm and model they were operating on. These movements for freedom were inspiring them, and some of them have said so. You know, the Black Power, Black Freedom movements, and one was talking about the demonstration of Black Power at the Olympics, you know, where the brothers stood up and raised the fist. That inspired some physicists because they're seeing a system that's out of balance, that is oppressive, and they're beginning to question their own paradigm. That's coming from your culture, baby. In the case of some of them, they are now also looking eastward. So Lao Tzu to Taoism in China, which is their philosophy of the spirit, you know, not the most popular philosophy in China. Confucianism is, but Lao Tzu, with his orientation on the feminine, on emphasizing the strengths of weakness and the importance of a order in the cosmos that is just. This is part of what some of those who are caught in this material paradigm coming out of the West are beginning to question. And they are beginning to see that they don't have a rationale for their science. So some of them are looking eastward. And some now need to look Africanward. So these nomads who kind of lay the foundation for a lot of this stuff that goes wrong, that includes the Greek departure from anything that's balanced, worshipped, because they were still in the realm of spirit, they worshipped mainly male spirits who were spirits of war. Their favorite objects were knives and spears and bows and arrows, any kind of weapon that could subject people, and horses that they could get on to travel to take stuff from people. So women were viewed as something that they could conquer and control, both in Western societies and in other societies as well. And so when we're looking at this move to separate spirit from matter, a part of this is tied to the separation of masculine from feminine and the subordination of feminine to masculine in the patriarchal order. So the Greeks, their contribution is to create a materialistic model with secondary distorted influences. One of these is in the form. I've discussed this in a previous show. This is something that Plato got from Socrates, and Socrates got this from Kemetic. And it was this idea that the form was a entity or being that came from what Socrates said were pre-existing things that existed in heaven, and that these pre-existing things Plato called form. And so these pre-existing things could be truth, justice, and whatnot, though the Greeks were not into truth. And so Plato takes this, and he is taking what in Dogon thought would be a dunoso, their table of signs, which is a duno, universe, so words of the universe. And they're taking these words that are embodiments of cosmic truth and recognizing them as the source of anything else that comes into being. So justice would be the source of any kind of practice of justice, the ideas of justice, so the form, And so that's an idea that was captured from Kemetic thought and African deep thought, and was then transformed by Plato into the idea that the form was the pre-existing idea. And then he inserted what is the beginning of despiritualization and placing it above God. Above God. This is the beginning of the process of despiritualization. But then he creates the good. Now remember, in Greek thought and in all Aryan thought, good doesn't mean right, just, anything else. It means the powerful, the strong. But he takes the good and he dichotomizes it. He separates it. And so he creates the separation of good from bad, intuition from reason. He is beginning the process of what I call despiritualization, or taking the spirit out of matter, or taking the spirit out of humans, or taking the spirit out of thought. And so it is that problem that Plato starts, which involves the deification of despiritualized reason. Western philosophy is grounded in the idea of spirit, that reason governs everything. In Plato's Republic, it is the philosopher who has no idea of spirit, but has every idea of reason separate from spirit. And since the Greeks had no word for truth, separate from truth, reason is an ordering principle to control everybody else. Despiritualized reason. In a society, the Greeks are following the same rule as the Aryan nomads, where women are put on the bottom. And this becomes their model for democracy. By the way, Greek democracy, which only lasted for over 100 and some odd years in a few of their city-states, practiced by only a handful of Greeks, was only practiced by males and they could only elect rich Greek males to office. And they call this the origin of democracy. Democracy begins among the hunter-gatherer societies where consensus became the standard for decision making. I've discussed this before, and it lays out the standard for African governance where all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society. That's the formula that God gave me when God gave me the formula for the just societies of the Trois. That is the formula for getting out of poverty. Because if all the males and females have the power to make the decisions on the planet, you don't have the rich stealing from the poor because you ain't got any rich. That's why when the Constitutional Convention was being formulated, it was because of Shay's rebellion. And when, Shay comes back from the War of Independence, broke, they ain't paid. The average white who fought in the War of Independence and the majority of blacks fought for the British because the British promised them some freedom. Later for this land of the free and the home of the brave. Land of the rich and the home of the knave. You understand? Blacks were going for whatever they could get out of it. But the fact is, when this guy comes back from the War of Independence, Shay, he's losing his house. It's gone up on auction. Why? Because he couldn't pay taxes. Why couldn't he pay taxes? He was fighting in the War of Independence, which he wasn't getting paid much for, barefooted and everything else. Many of the soldiers that fought against Britain, that was the case. So then they started a movement. They started movement against courthouses and stuff, and stopping them from selling their property. The founding daddies had their convention to stop this Shay's rebellion from spreading. Why? Because they said if they didn't stop it, the people would equitably distribute the wealth. So we're talking about the Kemetic African philosophy of the unity of spirit and matter. When you unify spirit and matter, you're also, the societies that are going to do that are the ones where males and females are unified. Those are the ones where males and females were equally empowered, like it was among Native Americans who followed this model when it was carried to them. From these Kung people, these Twa people. You hear me? So what we see then is this materialistic model that comes out of the Aryan model, that then comes out of the European model that Descartes and others contribute to, where, among other things, spirit is separate from matter, becomes the basis for creating cold-blooded systems where the only thing you're interested in is the market and profit and the hell with people. And so we find the people ground under this. So Plato's form is the beginning of despiritualization by subordinating God to the form and raising good as the highest principle. And good is based on reason despiritualized. But the key point is it's a dichotomy, a separation of reason from spirit. And so when we're talking about how the Black freedom, Black power movements empowered Blacks to go back to our source, the source which is Africa, and the deepest return was the spirit return. For people like me, my first awakening wasn't spirit-based. It was historical and political, and later spirit-based. But my mental freedom, when it came to the freedom of my mind, where my mind began to harmonize both spirit and matter, masculine and feminine, came when I began to deal with the way in which Western thought had imprisoned my mind. And that was through a mentality of separating good from bad. And so it was when I began to see that I was strong on the masculine and weak on the feminine, which meant strong on reason, weak on intuition and emotion. Even though intuition had guided me a lot, you don't win all your battles without drawing from some. But I was still weak on it. And so it took internal cultivation. When I go back and look at my own development, I'm using this to give you an idea of how you can use this yourself. I recall when we were forming the National Black United Front, and they're having a convention right now. And I was national vice chair of it for about 23 years, and one of the four founders. And we had a crisis in the National Black United Front. It could have nearly fallen apart. And so in that crisis, in 1 week, I wrote a 99-page booklet called Strategies and Tactics for Building a Mass-Based Black United Front. And I got the only call that I got from Maulana Karenga. And he calls me up, you know. And Karenga has this high-pitched voice. And I remember this is 1979. And he says, Shaka. At that time, he says, yeah, my name was Shaka. Shaka. I said, what? That's the most balanced analysis you've ever made. Well, Karenga was in on some stuff that I was trying to cool out. You know what I mean? I won't go into that. But I said, yeah, thanks, brother. But when I go back and look at this 99 pages, it was a part of the freedom of my mind from this either or, black or white, good or bad, masculine or feminine. You understand? It was rewooding my thought pattern, which was aided by Dogon philosophy, especially, but by New African, especially that blues stuff that Lerone Bennett was talking about. It was transforming my thought pattern from separating the blues from the spirituals, from separating good from bad, to understanding as the Black folk culture says, in the best of us, there's bad, in the worst of us, there's good. Good and bad coexist. Masculine and feminine coexist. Spirit and matter coexist. But spirit transcends it because it's the higher part. It's the life part. It's the God part. It's the good part in the African sense of good. Are you getting this? Huh? So this dichotomy that Plato had created in the form of separating good and bad had also affected African American culture, meaning because we're coming out of enslavement, we're drawing on deep thought of Africa, and that's where this blue spiritual continuum comes in. We still have those blacks who are being taught that the blues is devil music, you know? The spirituals is God music when they're both the same. The only difference between the blues and the spirituals is the blues is about man and woman. The spirituals got to focus on God. That's the only difference. You hear me? They got the same sound and everything. And I hear black people saying, I love gospel music, but I don't like the blues because they think the blues is about sadness. There's a blues saying that says, I got the blues, but I'm too damn mean to cry. You hear me? You show me a blues musician that's ever cried on stage. You also show me the spiritual blues or the blues that are the spirituals. And you show me where one person's ever committed suicide based on this. Country music, which is white people's blues, a lot of people commit suicide because it's sad. It's that barnyard sound. It's pretty too, because it's their interpretation of our culture. That's where they got their Southern accent from. The Niger-Congo Bantu speech pattern, y'all, that comes from us. R-A-E-O-U. That's the vowel pattern of African linguistics. That's Southern speech, y'all. Huh? So they picked up a little barnyard beauty there. And some of them a lot, like Dolly Parton. I like Dolly Parton, you know. All that money that she made off of a song that one of our great singers sang, she put it into black businesses. I say, go on, Dolly, you know. Not bad, you know. So the point is that African American culture, African culture have unified spirit and matter. spirit and body, mind and spirit, reason and intuition. They're not separate. And it is this thought pattern that will enable you to save yourself and save the planet. You hear me? Because when you get into this thought pattern, you're getting into God's mind. And I've seen God, I've experienced God's mind 2 times. And I said this before. What God thought gives you is the whole of a part, the whole of a part. And so my book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality, I put forward twinlinealism as a model coming out of male-female equal empowerment. It means that if you're descended from the mother, you're descended from the father. Grandmother, grandfather. God, if God is he, God is she, we know God isn't either. But if it's going to be one, it's got to be the other. And this twinlinealism, this twinlineal model of male-female equal empowerment, masculine, feminine synthesis, the union of spirit and body, mind, reason, and spirit, that thought process enables us to capture what's going on in the cosmos. The best quantum physicists now recognize that there is no separation in the cosmos. Everything is connected. It's a whole, you know? So Dogon, Kemetic, Yoruba, Asante, and other African and New African philosophies have not made the mistake of separating spirit from matter, nor sacred from secular. So Twa, Bambara, Dogon, Yoruba, Asante, and African American deep thought models see that spirit and matter, body, mind, and spirit are one, not separate and in warring parts. But because of the intrusion of this into African American culture, we've had to deal with that. So when Thomas Dorsey is bringing the blues back into gospel music and creating gospel blues, he has to deal with the way in which what he's doing is being defined as double work. He has to overcome that, transcend that, because there ain't no double, baby. God rules hell. You hear me? God ain't got no second angel, fallen angel out there who second only to power to God, you know? And when we do wrong, we run around here blaming the devil. The devil ain't got nothing to do with it. There ain't no devil. That's a boogeyman. I know I'm stepping on people's toes, but it's a boogeyman, you know? And in fact, what we should be doing is criticizing ourselves. We did something wrong. Don't blame it on the devil. Of course, in slavery, Africans were correct in defining the devil as a white man. You know what I mean? Because he behaved in devilish ways. So this is the whole thing right here. So Africans, especially the Kemites, Dogon, mastered astrophysics through a spirit science where spirit and matter are viewed as one. Heaven, the cosmos, and Mother Earth were seen as connected through divine energy. And we know that divine energy is defined as Ma'at, harmony, truth, justice, right order. Ma'at, one of the passages I love most in the description of Ma'at is they describe it as the rudder of heaven and the beam of earth. The rudder is that part of a ship that gives it direction. Now we know heaven and the cosmos is not just a physical entity. You got planets out there, but it's basically energy that is infused in those planets to keep them moving. So rudder is not anything you can see. Rudder is a divine energy. It is the energy of harmony, truth, justice, right order, balance. Most important, truth. If you want to reduce Ma'at to one sentence, speak truth, do truth. Spend your life working on that, And we'll never get to all of it because we've all got shortcomings. Me, you, all of us. So it requires constant work. But the point is, we are now injecting into the cosmos a truth that those who have discerned its truths know the beauty of its order. And what we're seeing now with global warming, the heating up of the planet, the flooding, the extreme wildfires, Mother Earth is striking back. You violated the law of Ma'at. You violated the law of balance. You violated the law of kindness. And now these same rugged scientists who treated the earth like a machine and now no longer use a mechanistic theory, but still move on a material theory, now they're saying, oh, Mother Nature and the cosmos is delicate. Really? You're just discovering that, huh? You didn't care whether it was or not, as long as you could wring profit out of it, power out of it, and misery for everybody else through it. So this notion then of the unity of matter and spirit, with spirit being the most important because it is the source of matter, it gives life to matter. In internalizing this through speak truth, do truth, we were able to create noble human beings. And these are the human beings that walked through plantation doors and fought back. Acted like they were kings and queens, and it not because they believed that their parents were, but because they knew the nobility of the spirit of the light that dwelled within them made them powerful creatures, beings with God within them who were not entitled to any kind of inhumane treatment. Now, today, Western science, especially physics and astrophysics, rest on a view of the cosmos until recently as a machine, with matter being falsely viewed as the substance of the cosmos. These ideas are rooted in René Descartes, who was a mathematical physicist and who was a major influence on European pedagogy teaching methods, where he basically removed spirit from the teaching process. But as a mathematical physicist, was a leader in this field of thought. And so he plays a major role of separating spirit from matter, placing spirit in opposition to matter and downgrading spirit, pushing spirit to the side. And it's this removal of spirit from matter, in theory, because you can't really remove it, but in their view of things, their review of matter, by treating spirit as being secondary, this is a part of what enables you to objectify nature just as women are objectified. In fact, nature is treated as a female. And so in the empirical science of Francis Bacon, when he talks about observing nature, he treats it as the same process used in observing females, for the purpose of uncovering their secrets, for the purpose of control, to create a new science to dominate nature. And so with Descartes' system of removing spirit from matter, then if you have matter that is nothing but a physical or material entity, unconnected to you, you can wage war on it. You can do whatever you want to it. But if you're an inseparable part of nature, then whatever harm you do to nature, you do it to yourself. And that is the real truth. Every living entity is connected to every other one. In 1973, I had the privilege of working in the Ujamaa villages in Tanzania with a team of 10 people from Pan-African People's Organization. 3 months. Lost, I pointed this out before, 15 pounds. Doing agricultural work. We would sleep on hard concrete floors, whatever, you know. And I'm in one of these villages on the floor, and a snake comes into the room, and instead of the people there killing the snake, they just pick it up and take it out. And I saw the same regard for nature in general. Many times I saw the same thing happen. And I realized that I had adopted a Western view of these things are alien to me, stomp it out. It changed my whole idea of my relationship to nature. And, so, when ants get in the house, I don't spray them if possible, because first of all, you're putting the spray on yourself. But secondly, they're coming in because it's raining. It's, some conditions on the outside. They're going to leave at a certain point. Now, there's a point where you might have to do something. But generally, this idea of your relationship to the creeping and crawling things who Native Americans call their near relations. When you're in harmony with them, they'll teach you things. That's why George Washington Carver was the greatest scientist of the 20th century, because instead of materializing nature, he understood that spirit was in every part of nature, so he communed with nature. So Francis Bacon's empirical model, that's necessary to observe nature, but you're too arrogant to realize nature has something to teach you. And in fact, in the areas in which any creeping and crawling things masters, they're ahead of us. And if you've got a problem with them, you better think like them. If you're going to solve your problem, if you've got an invasion of certain species of entities that you don't want in your house, you better think like them. And then if you do, it won't be killing them. It will be preventing them from invading your own sanctuary. But the point is living in harmony with this. And it's been said before, in the African spirit material system with spirit ruling matter, human beings have the privileged position of being guardians of the cosmos, guardians of Mother Nature, not controllers, not dominators. So today, the cosmic view coming from Western science of the mechanical view of the cosmos is not in vogue in the scientific community. Western science still finds itself in a dead end because they don't have a model to replace this. And so they have invisible fields that they're dealing with, energy fields, but they have no model for explaining this. Dr. Abinga and I, we were talking about this, and we said, yeah, quantum physicists have reached their dead end. Astrophysicists, too, on this level, because they don't have a model for explaining the energy that is dominant in their field. By the way, the energy, which when you internalize it, master a field, enables you to create to the highest level, the level of innovation, the level of a Coltrane. I'm wearing a Miles Davis coat here. Kind of hard for you to see, but I'll show you here. This is Miles right here. That's Miles. And I wore this for this show to honor my people, Huh? And so when you pipe into this higher energy, that's where the real creativity is. Because if God don't speak to you, the greatest creativity ain't coming through you. I know that because I've experienced it twice. Miles, 4 times. Miles was at the White House, and some white woman came up to him and asked him, "What are you doing there?" He said, "Well, I've invented four sounds in music. What have you done to be here? The answer was she was white. And she knew somebody. Crooked, probably. You know what I mean? But did she create anything? The White House don't create much of anything except war and problems. So the mechanical view of the cosmos is going out of vogue in quantum physics, but the West lacks a model that provides a paradigm for understanding what's going on. And models are important. And when you're dealing with a model, it doesn't mean things that this thing they're describing actually happen. It means, because what Africans do with their systems is they capture the truths of the cosmos and stick it in a model. And then they teach it to their children. And then they take you through degrees of transformation. And then later, you understand, oh, that's describing how the cosmos came into being. Oh, huh? You just think it's a story. It's not random, So to understand that everything that is matter is held up by invisible energy, we call spirit. Because the West doesn't care, they don't understand its source. And last week, we were dealing with the theory of evolution. This magnificent interconnected cosmos, of which there are probably many, just came into being. Really? But I understand. I keep God out too if God was what they're saying God is. But if God is infinite force outside of space and time, God is the force that is in all of this that is interconnected, then you get a better understanding of what you're talking about. So Kemetic and African philosophy share an African cultural unity. And it understood that humanity, Mother Nature, and the cosmos are a unified whole. And this is really the key point in African deep thought. It usually comes back to oneness. And that's basically what the harmony is in African deep thought. It's the oneness. We're all spirits interconnected, So in ancient Kemet, while Ma'at provided the overall framework for the movement of the cosmos in every field of life, whether it's politics, economics, the justice system, families, economic systems. And that really influenced the person and how they operated in each of these spheres. They also had other models for explaining how life came into being. Dr. Theophil Ovinga, our greatest scholar on dynastic Kemet, in his great work on African philosophy during the Pharaonic period, he makes this observation, and I'll quote him, quote, "The primal, Primal, primal first egg is feminine and contains the breath symbolized by the Ankh, the symbol representing the breath of life at the dawn of Earth." That's a very good point, that the Ankh, which is the oval and the cross, represents life, because literally it means eternal life. The Dogon have the double Ankh, where you have the oval at the top, the cross, and then an open oval at the bottom. And I've said this before, the oval at the top representing the heavenly placenta, which carries life in the womb of the woman. But that's the invisible one. That's the spirit that gives birth to the life that is open on the bottom, which is birth, symbolizing the birth of a human being. And that's the earthly placenta, the physical one that you can see. And then the cross, north, south, east, west, fire, earth, air, and water. That life contains all the elements of life. So Bingo says the primal egg is feminine and contains the breath, breathing, symbolized by the Ankh symbol, representing the breath of life. And in Asante culture, they make it clear that it is God that gives you the breath of life. And when you leave this earth, what is the key thing that decides death is when you can breathe no longer. There's a rattle that people who are passing to the next realm have, and then the cessation of breathing. So now the Ankh is eternal life. You're going to the next realm. So he's noting that this egg is symbolic of the dawn of earth and the dawn of life. He goes on to say this, and I quote him: the cosmic egg, mysterious in essence, represents the morning of the nascent world in the state of becoming. So what he's saying is the egg is symbolic in African thought of the emergence of life in the world. And then, of course, it compares to the life within the womb of the woman, the placenta, which carries the woman. Notice the feminine is being given importance in unifying spirit and matter. Now, the Dogon have the same, because remember, I started this off by saying last week, there's a cultural unity in African thought. And so the Dogon, in the system of the clear word called Sodaya, Sodayyi, Sodayyi, those are two different words. This is the fourth degree of knowledge in the Dogon system. And as I was undergoing transformation and internalizing things, and I was apprenticing under masters, it was this system I was drawn on. But African Americans have this same system. The book that I'm finishing deals with that. John Henry Clark came through this system. He didn't know it was African. I interviewed him for the last 8 months of his life. I apprenticed under him for over 20 years. And the last interview was in his home in 1998 after an ASCAT, Association, the Study of Classical African Civilization in New York. He asked me to come. I was coming anyway. And that's when we also made the decision to hire Dr. Theophilo Obenga. I was with Dr. Leonard Jeffries. He's the one that told me that Obenga was looking for a job. And I'm quoting Obenga right here. So Dogon accounts of origin, which provide a metaphor, a paradigm for how we harmonize this planet by understanding its interconnectedness, spirit and matter. In the Dogon system of the clear word or Sodaya, Amma's creation of the world occurs in Amma's egg, which is pictured as the womb of all world signs. It is an oval with symbols inside called the Dunaso, words so of the universe. And so they're drawn out and mapped out. And so in this Dunaso symbol of the egg, or the clear word, which is described as Amma's womb, which is telling you that when Amma creates multiple universes, it's coming out of Amma. So when any African who's coming out of deep thought looks at the heavens, they will talk about God there. Just as anyone who is really in harmony with nature will talk about God there, because it's the force of God, the spirit of God, this infinite force, a part of which is in everything God created. And when you have that idea, you have a reverence for nature. You don't war on it. You don't try and destroy it. So in the system of the clear word that's explaining Ahma's creation of the cosmos. And the Dogons say 10 cosmoses, meaning many. Amma is tracing inside Ahma's womb signs. And these signs give birth to the cosmos. In other words, what's being said is that the signs are Ahma's thoughts, and the thoughts precede what God creates. I find this to be a better theory than the theory of evolution, though there's parts of it that's accurate, but basically that it just happened on its own. Really? So these signs are spirits. And what the Dogon are saying is the essence of a thing is the thought that gives birth to it. Now, I've done a number of series of shows on the power of your thoughts, you know, and then it's also the basis for power, by the way. So, in the words of the signs, they're expressions of God's creative thought before the things, the cosmos, comes into being. Now, this is some deep thought because here's the point. In astrophysics, you have a concept called singularity. Singularity is described in astrophysics, and particularly quantum physics, as that point before the emergence of the physical cosmos, the planets and everything else, the stars. And in this time, which is no time, by the way, in this period, I should say, of singularity, the laws of quantum physics no longer apply because this is before gravity. This is before time. And remember, the definition of God in the Bombard and the Trois context is God is infinite force outside of space and outside of time. So African astrophysicists have no problem with dealing with before time, or what the Kemites would say, before happening happened. See, what kind of thinking is that? And when happening happened, because they like to use the verb, you understand? The active principle, which is also describing invisible spirit forces. So, singularity is that time before you can see anything. Singularity, the Dogons would say, was when Aduna, so God, Amma, was translating into God's womb the signs of what God wanted to create. In other words, Amma, the ideas that would give birth to the thing itself. And we know your thoughts give birth to reality. And this is the part of God inside of you. Be careful what you think, because it not could happen, it will happen if you work on it long enough. So what's interesting here is Western astrophysicists say you can actually see a wrinkle in space, which is singularity, which is that first trace before the creation of the universe, which is described in the Sodaya clear word system as the picture God drew in God's womb of God's thoughts that preceded the thing itself. And since God exists in the realm outside of space and outside of time, Africans have no problem with happening before happening happened and when happening happened. See, we can deal with all of it. Astrophysicists can't deal with anything that hasn't got matter in it. You dig? Huh? Huh? So I'm saying all of this to say that the deep thought of Africa and of New Africa, and the Africans around the world, provides the foundation, the philosophical model for bringing balance to the planet. It's not enough to cut off the heating of the planet through burning coal and all of that. You have to have a philosophy that is one that can heal the planet the way George Washington Carver did. He said, no animal, no plant ever died when they were in his hands. He was a healer of nature. He wasn't a controller. We need a new spirit science in which spirit and matter, intuition and reason, body and spirit, matter and spirit are seen as one. And as we go about our work of trying to speak truth and do truth, we try and become one. And in so doing, we can bring harmony to this planet through a lot of other measures that have to be taken in the street. I'm a warrior, so I'm talking spirit stuff, but I'm not just talking about this is just going to happen because you think it's going to happen. No, you got to get out here and do something to make it happen. So, according to the world's first people, the Chua, this infinite force, which the Bambara call Ilani, what Bambara say is infinite force outside of space and time, the Chua call Ilani. And they say, this is the light, the force that lights up the stars, that provides light to human beings and life to all that exists, animate and inanimate. And it is this force that we need to cultivate as we're dealing with our political, our economic, our social work. The work to save the planet and to free our people and to free our minds. In conclusion, I want to end on this. In 1984, as National Vice Chair of the Black United Front, I volunteered to go to the Black Hills in South Dakota to support our allies, Native Americans, in this case, the Lakota people, in their struggle to save the Black Hills in North Dakota from uranium mining done by the corporations, which also poisons the earth, the atmosphere, and kills off a lot of Native Americans. And so when I was there, I met Russell Means, who was one of the leaders of the American Indian movement. And so I want to close on a statement made by him. And this comes from Mother Jones because this was a speech called Fighting Words for the Future of the Earth. And I'm paraphrasing what he said. He said, for the world to live, this Western despiritualized view of the world must die. Notice I didn't say they must die. I said their views must die. Don't anybody misquote me here. And in its place, we have to put the way of harmony, truth, justice, and right order. The truth that is inside of each of us, that if we live, will put smiles on humanity's faces because they'll live the good life. And this is going to come through creating just societies. Hotep. Hope you got something out of that. Wale. Speak truth always. Truth breeds trust. Trust breeds unity. No one unifies with those they do not trust. No one trusts those that do not speak truth. True. And we're all short on that. We all got things that we have to do to get more in harmony with that. Ain't none of us perfect. Oh, I know it. Okay, let's see if there are any comments. And Sister Nzinga Dugas, good to see you again, lady. Inyoka Ifua, glad to have you. Ubuntu Gogist, glad to have you. Alexis Terry, glad to have you. See if there are any comments here. Dr. Clark said we could have a real revolution without a gun. It's going to take our strong spirit. Well, we'll see. But the real revolution is the revolution of spirit, mind, and body, and the pursuit of truth. Because whether it's pursued violently or not, the results won't be good if the intentions aren't. And if we don't have models that we're living in which we treat each other in kind and just ways. Alexis Terry, George Washington Carver knew a lot about soil health, understood the unifying source that heals animals by healing plants through the soil. Yeah, and he was also someone who said he thought God's thoughts. And that was a key thing that enabled him to come up with many breakthroughs. Okay, let's see. Wolf Manlu, the thought. Ptah took action by making a sound, a moon, and a 10. Heat and light, energy came out of noon. Yeah, the power of speech, good speech. M. Jewel, Ashe. Be careful of your thoughts, they become the reality. Very true. Michelle Mayberry, love to ask at great and powerful organization. Yeah, true. Part of that awakening. Wolf Manlu, the cosmic egg rests above the crossbar. The crossbar is equivalent to the event horizon or the beginning of time. And the shaft is light, the medium by which the medium by which creation is carried out. That's interesting. Lady M, thank you, Lady M. Okay. See if there's any questions in there. Crates for, thank you for your comments. Point is made. We need to stop thinking in opposites since everything is connected. Western thought has us thinking in opposites. Yeah, in conflict, because basically that's been their relationship to the world, conflict and separation, separating things into opposite categories rather than viewing them as twin. Because in African thought, things that the West would call opposite are twins because they complement each other. One is necessary for the other. Land of the free and home of the slave. Yeah. Let's see if we got anything else here.